Hey, welcome back to another engaging episode of What the Tech. Now, today's episode is all about the life of a software salesman, a role that is challenging yet rewarding. We'll dive into the intricacies of selling software, the ups, the downs, and the humorous yet profound experiences on the road to success. Now, as Bill Gates once said, software is a great combination between artistry and engineering. So let's dive into this fascinating world where artistry meets engineering and business meets technology. Join us as we uncover the experiences of a friend of mine who has spent over a decade in this space. Let's go. Today, we are blessed to have our very own co-host, Steven Faust, back in the hot seat. A highly credentialed technologist and enthusiast, Steve's unique blend of technical prowess and keen sense of humor makes him one of my favorite voices on the show. We love his funny take on things and his unique perspective on tech. So buckle up for a fun and insightful conversation with my man, Steve. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Always good to have you, my man. As I like to, because I like to laugh, I always like to ask Steve a question that he wasn't expecting. So, Steve, before we dive into the heavy stuff, and there's a lot to cover here, I want to understand from your obscure perspective, if you were stuck in an elevator with a potential prospect client and you had just 1 minute to make a sale, what would you pitch?
I'm going to go out of the box here because I'm fairly certain most people aren't going to buy a complex contact center solution when they're stuck in an elevator. But let's see. I also think I would caveat this question by who I was stuck in the elevator with. It would definitely vary between Elon Musk or a supermodel. But let's see. What would I try to pitch? Maybe how about an emergency elevator rescue kit? I think that'd be the easiest thing to sell. They'd be like, wow. I'm on it. And I think that's a perfect example of what we're going to lead into today, right? Is that people, once they see the value of something because there's a need, that's what salespeople are supposed to do. Need, and then you show them the value, and then bam, sale, right? Versus, if they're fearful for their life because they're trapped in an elevator worrying about their kids, and you're like, hey, look at this gizmo. It's going to save you 10% on your car insurance. And they're going to be like, I'll kill you, right? They don't care about that. So,
do I get a pet gecko?
Yeah.
Transaction?
A little.
Will it talk to me in an English accent?
Yeah, exactly. I always heard when I was in grad school, they said, you'll find the best marketing on the planet for companies that have products that are hard to differentiate, which makes a ton of sense, right? Soap is one of those. Insurance is one of those, right? So, even beer, right? If you think about the companies that drop a ton of money, right? Why do they do that? It's because their products in and of itself is very similar to a ton of other products. So how would someone pushing the cart down the aisle or whatever pick up A over B, especially if they can't even tell the difference, right? That's what they came up with the Pepsi challenge. But honestly, most people can't even tell the difference between things like that. I mean, from an example we did in grad school, everybody was like, I'm Coke, I'm Pepsi. And then we did a taste test. A ton of them got it wrong, like a blind taste test. They were like, oh, it's definitely Coke. Nope, Pepsi. What? It's like, honestly, they can't tell the difference. But they've been programmed through a ton of marketing that they love Coke, and that's all they're going to buy, right? And that's why you see the top marketing firms in the world are things that are pretty innocuous. Heck, that's why you see even not that many people go to malls these days, but those people that run around and spritz you. Like, why would you pay someone to do that? Well, it's because they can't tell the difference, right? Like, most people are like, yeah, it smells good. Everything smells good. Like, so the only way they're going to buy your thing that smells good is if you run around and spray them in the freaking face, right? That's, again, why you have to do that.
I mean, in my mind, if you were to spritz me like that, I imagine myself like karate chopping somebody.
Jugular.
Yeah, right. Oh, but now I smell nice, so
exactly. Yeah,
it's okay, right? Because nobody ever expect anybody who smells so nice to do something like that.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. Tell innocence.
As long as there's no footage of that. Yeah, exactly. He assaulted me first.
Yeah, he brought it on.
I felt threatened. So let's set the stage here. Now, picture this. You're here in the year of 2024, like the rest of us, and the sales landscape has really changed, right? And I think it's wild because it's really an untamed frontier where only the most agile actually survive. I see people rolling through sales careers like crazy, and there's a reason for that. It's because they're not really learning the craft. They're just doing the mechanics of it. And so you've got this spray and pray approach that we see from folks, basically blasting out cold emails like confetti at a parade, really just hoping that anything sticks, right? And then there are those like on the sales leadership side that have really traded their bags for like this crystal ball approach of using their sales dashboards to really, predict the future of new revenue without actually coaching or investing the time in the new consultants. And so the art and science of things have gone away, and therefore the sales strategy and etiquette is not being deployed effectively across organizations. And so it's really a whole new world out there. So let me drop some sage advice on you with Zig Ziglar. He said, stop selling, start helping, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about value and what that means today. But essentially it's simple. It's a simple mantra, that is, that it's really the heart of the shift that we're actually seeing here, right? And so in 2024, it's not about being aggressive with your sales pitch. It's really about serving as a trusted advisor, particularly around a consultative or software type sale, right? It's really all about understanding your client's needs before they do, right? Being kind of having your own crystal ball in a specific way, but really being so good at your job that you see the real pain points. Anyways, so we've got influencers like Jill Conrath who are basically preaching the gospel of value-driven selling, right? And you better believe that people are actually listening to us, especially the buyers, right? But of course, there's a flip side to that. There are haters, of course, there's haters with any, cause, who claim that this is all just a fad, right? They're passing this as a trend that will fade into obscurity. But let's face it, folks, this is not going anywhere. And the numbers don't lie. The people who do the value selling do much better, right? So here's the story and how it breaks down. Picture a door-to-door salesman, right? He's trying to sell a vacuum cleaner the old way, which is basically just talking about how great the vacuum is, right? But now he actually starts to ask some questions, right, that lead us potential pain points like, hey, do you have any allergies, right? Do you have any problems with pet hair? How busy is your life, right? You name it. Asking questions around things that might be important or pain points to that client. And then this person, he positions the vacuum as potentially the solution to those specific problems because I've got those pain points. And so his pitch is no longer just about a product. It's really about the value that it brings that particular customer in their life, right? And that's truly, not to break it down to that simple approach, but that's truly the future of sales, especially in software sales, my friends. And instead of making that a one-time sale, you're actually building a trusted long-term relationship and partnership that should last years, right? If not decades. And so I want to welcome you to the new sales that we're seeing in 2024, the year that the hard sell went soft. What do you think, Steve?
I like it. I mean, heck, value selling to me, I wouldn't call it a fad. I mean, that was the first sales class professional sales training I ever went to, and that was in 2008. So, I mean, that was a while ago, right? And I remember it really opened my eyes to, how, because I always, when I think of salespeople, it's almost like you put them in the same category as maybe politicians or whatever other profession you don't like, right? Like, oh, they're pushy, they're bossy, they're slimy. We're going to get into that as well. But like most people have a negative impression of them. And I think, why is that? Because typically, heck, why is Amazon so successful? Well, there's no salespeople. There's just people, products. They look at reviews. They're done. There's no middleman, the salesperson, like try to push something. And most of the time when you think, oh, if he's pushing something, it's maybe something I don't want or need. And that's why he's you almost get that impression just by the moment he starts trying to sell to you is that, oh, look, this guy gets paid to sell me things. So no matter if I need it or not, he's going to jam it down my throat, right? And then you're just like,
Yeah, like walking through the mall and getting sprayed in the face by somebody who's selling cologne, right? Uh-huh. We were talking about that earlier. It was a great example, and how they might get karate chopped if they did that. So let's talk about cringy sales tactics. We've seen them, right? I may have even used one or time or two because, I've been in sales for 20 years and I can say that, a lot of times new or junior salespeople do what they're told, right? And I think one of the things that I've heard said a few times that the right thing is always the right thing, no matter who says, you to do maybe the opposite, right? And so what we're trying to do here is give you some real strategies that will actually help you sell, because ultimately your manager I would think, would care more about you selling than they would about you even running their playbook. But a lot of times they forget how dated their playbook is and the way that they've been doing things, maybe the way that they were taught 20 years ago, right? And so a lot of times managers aren't always the best leaders in this. And so I would argue, whether you're listening to this or you're listening to other things, you should be thinking about making sure that you're staying current with kind of the latest strategies. But let's talk cringy for a moment. Anything come to mind for you, Steve, that, when you hear the word cringy sales tactics?
Yeah, I mean, I've been on the giving and receiving end. Now, I personally have tried to make it, one of the bedrocks of my profession is to not be cringy. But again, I've been in sales for, it's more than a decade, and I think I've definitely been part of a sales process that, had cringy elements to it. I mean, one of the ones I remember being most blatant, and I'll try to make this obscure, so to protect the innocent here. But I had
Are they
a
innocent
manager,
though?
Yeah, I know, right? I had a manager at a firm, and I remember we did a big presentation for a big customer. I want to say they were a bank, but they came back to us and said, "Look, we love everything, but it is critical that we have this feature." And I want to say it was something like, let's say there's 1,000 calls in queue, that I can cherry pick a call. Like say this call is now going to go to the front, because they had certain ways to identify these VIP customers. But they wanted to manually do it, not have it automated. So that way they could just drag it out. And we didn't have that ability. And we didn't have a partner that did it. I mean, it didn't exist, right? And I remember telling him, I'm like, yeah, it's unfortunate. Like, we don't have that. And then my boss spoke up and he's like, hold on. He goes, I have a direct line to R&D. So give me a second. So I kid you not. He totally makes us like a huge charade of this whole thing, where they're walking into this big conference room. He's on the phone. He's like, yeah. He goes, well, I gotta do what I gotta do. So you're just gonna have to deal with it. And he hangs up. He turns around, and then he's like, yeah. It is pure theater. I don't even think his phone was on. Right? Turns around. And he goes, close the door. I mean, he really sets the stage, right?
Yeah.
And then we close the door. And he goes, all right, I was just told not to tell you this, but I talked to R&D, and we've got something called Project Longhorn. And he goes, what that is, it is the ability to, yeah, I know, I just like totally pulled it out of his arse. It's the ability to cherry pick calls out of queue. And he goes, and if you guys are able to make a commitment to me, he goes, you will be one of the first customers, probably the first customer to roll it into production. And then I just falling over themselves. Really? Oh, that's great. We've talked to all these firms. They don't have it. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Like, talk about timing. Like, I'm in on it, right? I'm like believing it. We're driving to lunch. They've left. We're driving to lunch. I'm like, wow, I didn't even know you knew the head R&D. He goes, I didn't talk to anyone. He's like, I made that whole thing up. And I'm like, what? Like, they're going to kill us. He goes, don't worry about it. He goes, by the time they close, we implement, go to market, we'll have found a way to make it happen. Like that, which was what we call vaporware, right? That's a very common term in this industry, is vaporware. Now, you might think, oh, this is a small firm that was doing anything to survive. No, this is for a big firm. And I kid you not, I've seen, talk about publicly cringy. I was at, and I'm going to name drop here, a Cisco event, and they showed a contact center technology that had people just flipping over themselves. I had 4 customers that day ask me how much it was and if they could implement it. So I went to Cisco, and they kept giving me the runaround. And then eventually, I want to say this is like 6 weeks after the show, they tell me, we don't have that yet. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't have it yet? And I saw it on stage in front of like 1 million people, this product. And they're like, yeah, we actually were doing blah, like literally David Copperfield kind of crud. Like that monitor wasn't real. That thing wasn't real. I'm like, what in the world? And that was in front of the world. That was not some back office, like, like showing it to one customer. That was a global presentation of smoke and mirrors, like a product that did not exist. And man, I was so pissed.
Talk about
so
deep
pissed.
fake. That's just awful. Another cringy thing that I recently experienced. So I'm no longer selling software, but I help clients buy software in a way that makes sure that they're getting the best value for what they're doing. And I'm working with a group that they were looking at some of their technology, and this group specifically works within their industry. And so they've got a really big name in their industry, and they work with a lot of their peers in their industry. And they serve just this industry. And they brought this solution, thought that they were the only ones at the table. And, over 5 years, this is like $500,000 investment for them, right? Which, was not a small amount of money, right? And then, after I brought some other solutions to the table, showed them that they were actually way better, had more capabilities, and it was less than $200,000 for the same technology, actually better technology. They actually came back just after that and said, well, hey, aren't you ready to go? And they said, well, no, I don't think we're going to go in your direction. They said, why? I said, well, your cost, right? It's just way out of whack. It's not even in the realm of possibilities for what we could do. This is a new investment for us. And they said, whoa, price, okay. We didn't know that was going to be a concern for you. How about $120,000 off? How about that, right? And that's just a tactic that you see way too often. Mm-hmm. I, even in this conversation, as I'm negotiating with the other, I said, don't play any games with me. I want your best price this time. I'm not going to ask for any more off, because I don't think we need to do that, but give me your best price the first time. And having an advocate for yourself, because most people are junior to buying software. And even if they aren't junior, they're not doing it every single day, right? And so I think it's one of those things, it's a cringy tactic because you want to leave room to negotiate, because you want to make sure that you're maximizing whatever you get out of it. But that's not a very transparent way to do it. And that's another cringy thing that I've seen, aside from some of the sleazeball things that I've seen. That's just a cringy tactic that I see almost every software company using.
Yeah. Well, also where it gets tough is when you do lead with your best price, but they're so used to dealing with the cringe, and then they're like, well, give me your real price. And you're like, well, that is my real price. They're like, yeah, it is. They're like, you need to come down. Like, I know everybody marks it up. And you're like, no, we don't want to play those games. Like, we didn't mark it up. And then they don't believe you. They're like, okay, what's it going to take? And then you're like, oh, great, because everyone else has been cringy. Now I'm going to get punished for it because I actually led with, our best price, right?
Right.
And, yeah, I mean, it's you just can't win. And
well, a good sales consultant would take credit for what they do,
mm-hmm.
right? So say, hey, look, I'll be honest with you. This is our book price. You told me I had to come in and be as competitive as possible. And so this is 39% off of what our book price is. This is my best price. I'm not going to be able to go back. And so just compare this to whatever you try to negotiate with everybody else who's not going to be forthright with you the first time. They're going to go through this weird process where, like, well, make sure you let me know if that's not good enough, and then I'll go back through the channels and I'll make it happen, okay? Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, I get it, it's sales. You want to maximize it, but there's got to be a little more transparency, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's very much a balance, because one of the things that you always hear is what kills a deal is time. The longer you take to get to a quote, the longer you take to get approvals, the longer you take to get through redlining, legal, all of that. If you take forever, and that's where there's that real delicate dance, is that if you start playing the cringe with the numbers and you have to go back 4 or 5 times, that's a lot of time. And legitimately, you have a deals desk and they have to approve things. But again, if your whole thing is, hey, let's just try it this way or try it that way or whatever, that deal's going to stretch out versus someone else, because they're probably getting more than one quote. It's like, all right, super low right off the bat. what are you waiting on? And they're like, oh, well, we're waiting for these other 3 quotes to come back. And you're like, why? You know, and again, you keep pressuring them or hounding them. Then yeah, I mean, I've literally seen deals where they were going back for another approval and they just said it's done. Like, we've already closed with so and so, right? Like, that happens all the time. So getting to the brass tacks off the bat, you know, very critical, you know, in my mind. And also too, just understanding your limits, right? Because I mean, I've seen tons of salespeople have to slide back. They're like, you know what? I bet I could get you another 20%, and then they get nothing. Like they're just like, look, it's not worth it to us, and then they get denied, and then you got to go back and be like, oh, I actually couldn't get anything. You know, that's really where you look stupid, right? So I feel like never promise ahead of time. But I mean, sadly enough, I mean, I feel like why do they do the cringe is because if they can get success out of it, then they're going to keep doing it. I mean, they're coin operated. That's another great sales term. But these guys, you know, if they found success with whatever this is, you know. Yeah. I mean, I talked to salespeople that said they're having trouble getting a hold of a prospect. They'll mail them a baby's shoe. And I'm like, what is that about? And he goes, yeah. And then I'll put something in that says, hey, I'm just trying to get my foot in the door. That's his whole, you know.
It's his little baby foot?
Yeah, a little shoe for like a baby, you know, but you'll mail it to them, all right? And they'll be like, what the heck is this? And then they'll be like, just trying to get my foot in the door. And they'll be like, oh, he's clever. Let's buy from him, right? You know. But yeah, I get it. I mean, I feel like technology has definitely worked against sales in some regards in the fact that now it's just white noise. Everybody's trying to sell to anybody. I mean, if you get on LinkedIn today and you have any type of procurement in your title or any type of executive in your title, every day of your life, you will have salespeople contacting you, right?
Yep.
Using email, using whatever, all right? And they won't stop. I mean, they won't. Every day you will deal with that. And then the problem is that there are some you want to buy from, right? Especially if that's your job is buying things. But it's like, who do you even know to buy from, right? Like, again, that's honestly why I think more of those guys are more likely to go to a conference because they'd rather like walk around, look someone in the eye, you know, see their stuff in person, and then go walk around to a few more, but they're in control, right? Like those people aren't trying to shove it down their throat. They can you know, maybe look at it from afar and be like, yeah, I might be interested in that, and walk over, talk. And then I think you can at least, you know, establish somewhat of a rapport rather than just, you know, clicking on one of my 1,000 emails trying to sell me something.
Yeah, as I send you some spyware or something so I can see what you're doing on the other side so I can see what you're buying. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. That's probably never happened, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's where people always get creeped out. Like, that, you know, a lot of people say that, you know, some of the tech companies are doing that where they're listening through some of the smart home devices because I've experienced that where we start talking, hey, what about Riadoso? You know, and we just start throwing that out. And she's like, yeah, I used to go there when I was a kid. And we're like, all right, well, let's maybe get some travel plans. And you log into Gmail, just check your email, and there's all these ads for Riadoso. And you're like, oh, it's funny. I've never seen an ad for Riadoso in my life until today. So what a coinkydink, right? like,
right. Hashtag cringe, right?
Yeah. It's like, well, no, we're not listening to you. That's just a coincidence. Like, right.
What do you think about the budget question? Because here's my perspective. I was taught to ask for the budget, and in a lot of ways, this is something you want so that you understand as a sales consultant. Will my solution even fit into what your expectation is?
Yeah, you wasting your time. Yeah.
Am I wasting my time, or can I reset expectations for what really it is? But I think they're using that question a lot of times just to understand how much they can charge you. And so just understanding from a procurement standpoint, that's what the buyer sees too, I believe. And so I think a better question would be like, hey, look, what are the implications of you not fixing this? Because your budget has to be in line with what the implications could be, right? And so there's downtime and other things. And actually building a co-authored ROI is something that I'm a big believer in that a lot of organizations don't do. And I have a friend, and he was actually on What the Tech, Michael Farber, and he has the ROI shop. And the way that he kind of approaches budget is like, hey, look, there's got to be, you know, if you're looking to make an investment, and that's what a lot of times a software solution is. It's either an investment to fix problems with a current solution, or it's an investment to fix problems that you didn't know that you had sometimes that, you know, a software solution can fix. But at the end of the day, understanding that your prospective client a lot of times doesn't understand what their budget is, I think the less cringy thing than asking for their budget would be, hey, would it be helpful for us to walk through an ROI project that would include time, the investment and your current investment and things like that. And I think just being more thoughtful about it would be less cringy. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the more dollars involved, the more people that have to give approvals. How do you get approvals? Well, if you can justify the expense, how do you justify the expense? You're able to show there's a return on the investment. What does that really mean? Okay, it's going to make us money or it's going to save us money. Okay, how much money? Or why do you think that, right? That's the first thing someone on the board asks. Why do you think this is going to save us $2 million? And if you're like, because this guy in the brown suit told me, right? That's not a great answer, right? But a better answer is, they came in, they work with us, they gathered information, they understand our costs, and they understand, we have an average handle time for every agent of 2 minutes and 30 seconds. They are going to deliver this product, which is going to save each agent 15 seconds a call. We take 4 million calls a day. And if we pay the agents this much and we save them this much time, that equals this amount of money, right? People can understand that. Now, right. A lot of times there's hard ROI, there's soft ROI. If you say, look, I'm going to reduce the amount of time people are on hold by, 10 seconds a call, times 4 billion calls, you spend this much per minute for your telco. So those minutes aren't being used because these people aren't on hold, right? You give them a callback solution. That's a hard ROI. Like if those people aren't on hold, you don't pay the money. A softer one is like customer experience, CSAT. Okay, now since they're not on hold, they're not pissed off or they don't switch companies or leave you or whatever. What does that mean? And then you can kind of say, all right, well, let's say we improve your retention rate by 5%. And then it costs you $20,000 every time you have to go find a customer. Or the same thing, we improve your retention rate with your agents. And every time you have to onboard a new agent, you lose this much productivity. Now, those are more soft because you can't really say for certain how many agents are leaving because your system sucks or how many are going to stay because we've improved it. You're kind of working it out. But that's also where you can bring some credibility. Like we've done this with hundreds of call centers and we found these numbers to be plus or minus 5%, right? And then I think, to me, I think if your ROI has credibility, it's going to take time. That's another thing where it gets complicated is a lot of these customers, they're like demanding this super intricate ROI. And then the moment you ask them like 5 questions, they're like, I'm done. There's too many questions. It's like, well, how am I going to get at this data? Like if you want a really thorough ROI, like you say you do, and that you're going to need to go in front of your board to justify this expense, that you need to help me. You need to provide me this information. And sometimes, they either don't have it or it's a pain to get, but especially the bigger the organization, because it might involve 10 people. 10 people have each of the things you need, right? And then they're like, well, this guy is on vacation or he's not there, or he went out of town or whoever or whatever. And then it just gets, more complicated from there.
Yeah. Well, I really believe that a co-authored ROI is the only way to go, because if they're not invested in walking through the process, like you had mentioned, it's going to be really challenging for whoever your champion is within the organization to disseminate that to all the appropriate decision makers, because it makes it really easy for somebody to veto it, either in the finance or procurement department or, at the executive level, if you're kind of mid-level executive or VP or something like that. So I couldn't agree more with your examples there. Kind of moving on to the next part. What do you think, because there's a lot of advancements happening around AI and, software just in general. How do you feel organizations really need to potentially adjust their sales strategies for 2024 with those sort of things in mind?
Well, I'd say, again, when we're talking AI strategies and how it's going to affect things, I would say AI, in my mind, I would predominantly use it to leverage, I would focus more on the marketing piece of it, because, again, I feel like that's where marketing comes down to, okay, what are you trying to pitch? Who are you trying to pitch it to? What methodology are you using to pitch it? Like we just talked about a very poor example of marketing where you just kind of spray and pray, right? Where they say that. Now, sometimes I even hear that in a sales pitch where you're just like, I'm just shotgunning information, just hoping something sticks. But I think that's where AI can help you. I mean, heck, my example, which we called Cringy, was a good example of that. Where, and again, I'm going to go, as opposed to spying on people in their home, I'm just going to say, you look at trends for businesses, right? And you look at, okay, what are they buying? When are they buying? What is their budget cycle? And I feel like most of the time, to do a proper sale, to even get from finding out who you're going to sell to and how you're going to sell, there's a lot of research involved, right? And that's, AI is great at taking large quantities of data, sifting through it, and making decisions. And then based on those decisions, I think, would you rather call 10 really good prospects, even if you have to cold call them, rather than 100 maybes, right? Like, I think that's where, again, AI is putting less work on you at the front end, right? And I think most of the time people, they love a warm lead as opposed to a cold lead. Well, how do you get a warm lead? That's, again, where I think AI can help tee it up for you, right? Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, sales covers so many areas, but as we mentioned, like if it's a consumable that someone can just go to Amazon, you don't really need a salesperson. So most of the time when I talk about sales and how it's helping salespeople, I'm talking about big purchases that take a long period of time to close, and they're very involved, but you still have to, the timing is very critical. Right? Like, I talk to tons of customers where they're like, oh, if you'd only come to me a week ago, right? Like that kind of thing, right? So you've got to, the AI, I think, could be really good about that. Like, hey, look, we've been able to figure out that these people, their maintenance is ending at end of year, and they're very much wanting to move because they bought a new corporate office, like all the things that are publicly available. I'm not saying you're hacking them, but that they just bought another company and they want to consolidate a solution. That's public information. So it takes this public data and then it says, this is why we think these are, good prospects, right? And there's public data about what they own, right? Like this company owns vendor X and they also own vendor Y. And your product is really good at connecting vendor X to Y. So therefore they equal good prospect, right? Or just their size. Like our company doesn't really sell products to anyone with less than 200 seats in their call center. Okay, so stop giving me these 50-seat call centers, right? And, you would think it sounds obvious, but, I've worked at tons of places where we had bad leads and we didn't figure it out till further on the sales cycle. This guy's like super gung-ho, I want to buy everything. And then you're like, how many agents in your call center? 3. And you're like, we can't even sell to you, right? Like it's not even a thing. So I think to me, that's a big part of the AI. I also feel like there is a role for it, in the sales data when you're creating pipeline, kind of the crystal ball method you're mentioning there. But I think, again, you've really got to, use your own data mixed with outside data. I think that's also a big part of it, because I think both are relevant. If you typically see, like most sales companies, before year end, you'll see a spike in sales because everyone is trying to make their number. So that's the same way you forecast almost anything. Okay, what does it look like for the last 5 years? Okay, this is the typical trend. Okay, right. But let's also bring in the aggregate from other, firms. Okay, how much has the economy affected them, right? What does that look like? Taking in all those other factors, I think it is also a big part of AI is to helping you make those predictions, because that's another part of sales that, in my mind is, I don't know if I want to call it shady, just always just crazy when you're just like a new sales guy and you're like, all right, how much business are you going to do this quarter? And he's never sold anything before. And he's like, I don't know. A certain amount, like he's just totally out. Well, you got to do at least 250,000. Okay, I'm going to do 250, and then you get this pipeline of like 10 250,000s because that's the minimum they'll accept. And then you're all pissed off when you don't get $4 million. You're like, you guys promised me $4 million. It's like, well, I didn't promise you anything, but you told me I had to commit to 250, so I said 250, right? Like, so it just becomes this ridiculous song and dance. That's again where I think AI could help. Like AI could say, look, like you mentioned, rolling through sales guys. Okay, of the last 100 sales guys we've had in this role, their first quarter, no one's done more than 125. So we're going to say his number's 125. I don't care if you need 250. The real number is close to 125 because that's the average, right? As opposed to, salespeople making up numbers because they're being forced by sales leadership. Then sales leadership getting pissed off nobody made their number, right? Like there's no AI involved. There's no I at all involved in that in my mind, right? There's what you want. You can have a target, but if you don't base a funnel on reality, some reality, then it's just, smoke and mirrors.
Well, yeah, it's fantasy. And I think that a lot of people live in fantasy because of, maybe past successes or, the way it used to be. But the reality is that that changes. It fluctuates every single day, every year. And I do think the the major component of the success and failure of sales organizations. And I caveat that a lot of this the responsibility does go down to the sales consultant on being engaged and doing what they're supposed to do. But sometimes they make it impossible for you to hit your numbers. Like they give you this nice salary, you're like, oh, this is great. And the old 80-20 works out where, the top 20 people, and it's not even because they're always the top 20. A lot of times it can be that they've outlasted people. Their timing was really good. Maybe they had a huge territory when they first started and they had inbound leads, and then they learned through the process of, success and failure when there really wasn't anybody looking at them the way that they're scrutinizing, in 2023 or 2024. And so it's not even fair to kind of look at how Joe did it, 5 years ago when the company was in its infancy and they had 10 states that they were focusing on, and they had a bunch of inbound opportunities with intent, right? Versus, Jane, who now has one state and no inbound leads and is trying to generate from 0 to 250,000 as an example, right? There's no simple way to just say, well, this is how it used to work, because it's not the same situation anymore. And so I do think sales leaders, chief revenue officers, VPs of sales need to figure out a better way to kind of grow over time. And maybe AI can be a part of that, is maybe predictive analytics on like, hey, our growth trend has shrunk from, we were growing at about 30% about 5 years ago. Last year it was 15%. Kind of taking that predictive process and saying this year it's realistic that we'll grow 12%. And so setting things appropriately, because you're not really giving a lot of times these sales consultants an opportunity to be successful because the environment has changed, right? And so it's not all just on sales and these cringy things, because I would preach to you that, hey, learn the right way to do sales regardless of what your manager or leader is saying. Like, do the right things and good things will happen. I've always been at the top 10%. Never have I just taken, whatever my leader said, and that's law. And if I had done that, I wouldn't have been in the top 10% every single time, because I was looking for creative ways in the market that I was in, the people that I was serving, to provide more value to them than even what my manager wanted me to do or leader, right? And so you really have to kind of think for yourself, and that's the argument. And leveraging, predictive things or some form of intent is a good thing. And that actually leads me to a question that I actually didn't have on my list of things I wanted to talk about, but have you worked with intent data at all? Because I have a personal opinion about intent data, because I want it to be great. It just hasn't been. Have you had the opportunity, whether with Zoom Info or Bombora or some of these other platforms, to actually leverage them?
I've seen some of it. Again, not a lot, and it's interesting. Some of the contact center technology is all about intent as well. Like when someone goes to your business over some type of digital, pipeline, however you want to describe it, and so what is their intent? Because if you can get to their intent, then you can more quickly solve their problem, and you can figure out the best way to serve them. So yeah, I've seen it on both pieces of it. But yeah, like you said, it's pretty cutting edge. Like I don't think it's quite baked.
Yeah, I've run campaigns directly at groups that had a ton of intent. One of the things I have found difficult is that that intent doesn't necessarily have a name attached to it. So you have an IP address, it came from such and such company, but you have no idea who was looking for whatever that keyword was or things like that. So I found it very outside of very small organizations where, if you, again, spray and pray everybody, I think you can find maybe the person who had the intent. But a lot of times they're not even a decision maker, looking for that. And so that has been challenging for me, as much as I'd like to do that, because like your example of, Amazon listening to you, right? They know you have intent because you literally just talked about it, right? So that's a cringy way to do it. And so how do we find something where we're trying to, I want to deliver my great value and services to somebody. They have intention to buy it. How do we shortlist the best quality solution for that particular person, because they may have limited needs, even in the realm of saying purchasing a CRM or something like that, versus, somebody else who, I just need something that I can keep my contact information in. It doesn't need to be robust at this point. I'm not big enough, or I just can't justify a huge expense. Like a HubSpot is free for a lot of those people, as an example, right? And they get you in, and then they sell you a few upgrades or whatever. So that being said, I like the idea of intent from a capability standpoint, but I haven't had any success with it. I was just curious if you had, but that's been what I've heard from other people as well. Going back to intent, we've talked a little bit about ethics a little bit, like the right thing is always the right thing to do. So as we move towards kind of automated processes for a lot of this, the volume of content that is going out there has significantly increased. I think I read a statistic the other day that said there are 4 billion pieces of content being created every single day. So there's a lot of noise, right? But they're creating that content through artificial intelligence, through machine learning, automated processes. And a lot of times they're using this data that they're getting, these data sets that they're getting from, some of these systems that have cookies on them, they have spyware, they have all this stuff that will tell you, like, for instance, there are systems out there that if you visit somebody's website, they will get your contact information off of your IP address. It's really that simple. And then they can automatically, with a workflow, start sending you emails. And it's happened to every one of us, right? As soon as you hit that accept the cookies, basically now they're spying you. They have all your information. They're doing this a lot of times on web browsers, not web browsers, extensions, like Google Chrome extensions. A lot of times are tracking that information to see what you're doing. That's why a lot of times you have the recruitants, because they're paying attention to what you're doing because they want to sell you more stuff because they're selling your information, right? And so you're the most valuable person. But I'm curious, your perspective on the role of ethics in sales. How do we not be cringy as sales consultants? And how do we, protect ourselves potentially from that? Thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a complicated issue because, you got everybody and their brother is demanding results. So I feel like if you tell a sales guy, hey, you've got to kind of ride in this gray moral area, they're going to do it every time because that's how they're evaluated. I think if you told the sales guy, hey, look, 80% of how I'm evaluating you is your numbers, 20% is how sleazy you are, maybe they would change, right? But unfortunately, like 100, I'm not even going to say 9 times out of 10, 100 times out of 100, they're judged on the numbers. The numbers drive everything. And I've seen them get away with murder, like treating people bad, doing things that were definitely unethical, but they were the top performer and they could get away with it, right? And no one's going to stop them, right? Like they brought in enough business that everybody's like, just keep on keeping on, right? Like, short of some heinous crime, they were going to be enabled. They were enabling these people, right? So I think one of the things is if you have an organization and you want to stop that behavior, you've got to create a program to incentivize good behavior, right? Like, look, I want to understand like how you all of a sudden, got access to this information. Oh, I paid somebody who, dug through their trash can. Okay, like that's not okay. Like, whatever it was, right? Unfortunately, a ton of organizations don't want to know. Like, I wouldn't say they support the cringe, but they don't even want to know about it. Like, hey, I don't care how you got $1 million in sales. Good for you, because the moment you tell me, I'm liable. Like, hey, look, you knew this employee was doing this shady stuff. Oh, I had no idea. So companies love to play dumb, right? Because you don't tell me, I don't. So again, if you want to foster this behavior, you say, look, I need transparency, and I want to understand what's going on. And if someone, most of the time, the other sales guys can kind of get wind of what you're doing. If I hear from someone that you're doing some unethical tactics, like that's not okay, right? And then help them feel supported. Like, hey, look, I didn't make my number, but I didn't do anything shady. And they're like, all right, we're good with that. Versus if you make it cutthroat, you're going to foster that type of behavior. Now, how can you protect yourself from that? I would say, it is a challenge these days. Ultimately, you can put all types of software programs that fight malware, spyware you name it. I mean, I think that's a good starting point. At the end of the day, it's difficult. I mean, I know some people that take it to the extreme. They're like, I never accept a cookie. I never do. But it's like, I can't even donate to my kid's fundraiser unless I accept a cookie on the site that does the donation, right? So it's like, I can't live in that world where I don't accept any cookie, right? I think, you as a consumer have to kind of find that balance. But what I think is crazy is if some guy's like, oh, these people did something shady, I'm never doing business with them again. Unfortunately, like, it's like, okay, you're never buying anything again? Like, how many companies are doing the shady stuff? That's another reason I feel like they can get away with it. It's like yelling at an airline because the flight was delayed. Oh, you're going to switch to another airline where there's no delayed flights? Like, you don't really have a choice. Like, you're switching from one sleaze to the other sleaze. They all got the sleaze going on, right? So it's, you can't really threaten them with your business. Now, I feel like you can use social media to expose them, especially if you feel like you were wronged, on a very high degree, right? And I've seen that. I've seen a lot of companies, like one of the ones that is a competitor in the space I'm in. I'm not going to try to, for sake of name dropping here, I'm not going to say them, but if you just type in their name, just type it in to Google, 1 million hits come back with how bad their support is. Like, worst support ever. Support sucks. They don't answer the phone. And I feel like, again, that's a way as a consumer you can stop that practice, because if and to me that's another example of a shady sales tactic, right? Because you could show them an amazing product and never bring up support because they didn't bring it up, right? And your support team could be some guy that answers the phone maybe once a week, right? Like, you like deliberately suppress what you know to be the faults in the company. Now, I'm not saying you want to lead with that, right? Because that's not fair.
Right.
But I also think, like, you as a salesperson taking an active role, right? And bringing it up with the organization. Hey, look, I don't feel good about selling this stuff if we turn around and don't have any way to support it, right? Like, that's not fair to these customers. And that is not a trusted advisor, and that is not building towards a long-term relationship, because you're killing me. The moment it breaks and they try to call and no one helps them, I am dead to that person. Like, they don't want to hear from me. They don't want to talk to me. You have done that to me. So when you're like, why aren't you getting us more revenue with this customer? I'm going to be like, because you don't support me. You don't have my back. You basically have created this shell game of resources and made a really great product, but no one's here to help it, right? Like, that's not fair. And then, I think that's, again, where, the salesperson needs to take a more active role in the organization, not just like, I know tons of salespeople that if they make it on the front end and they come out the back, they don't care. They're fine with revolving through every one of their customers. Again, that is not value sell. There's no long-term value there, right? That's just you just shoving them in, and it's someone else's problem, right?
Yeah, I think you make some amazing points there about salespeople having a voice, especially within maybe a smaller organization where there's maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 sales people. And, doing the right thing is sometimes going upline to, a leader and saying, hey, look, here are the problems we're having. And, there's good attrition for salespeople. Like, don't stay at a place that doesn't take those sorts of things seriously, that isn't intentional about improving things on a regular basis, that expects you to continue to sell, either poor quality, or poor, follow up and customer service, because ultimately it is your name that those customers are buying. Believe it or not, it's not what's on your shirt, right? And so it's very important for you, if you want to have a long and successful sales career, that you've got to be able to deliver on the things that you promise, or don't promise them.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
As
And I've seen that. I mean, when salespeople go and try to find another job, they're selling themselves, but they're also selling the relationships. I mean, I know a ton of salespeople that got hired because they had some big names in their pocket. How did they have that? It wasn't magic. It's the fact that they've been working with, I'll say Sears and Roebuck, just some company that doesn't exist. They were working with that company for 20 years, and they formed a deep partnership. And why have they been there so long? Because that company knows if they say X, X is going to happen. Like, they'll make it happen, right? They'll go hell and high water to make that promise come true. And that's what they want. Like, at the end of the day, they want all the bells and whistles, but really they just want someone that will follow through on what they were committed. Because, I mean, being in procurement, I feel like half the time that doesn't happen because of things like I mentioned earlier, the vaporware. People overselling. I was thinking of an example the other day. It's like, if I had advice for salespeople, it's like sell to exactly, what makes sense for this product, right? If you have a pocket knife, think of all the things you can do with a pocket knife, right? Do not break out of that zone to try to get a sale. Do not tell people they can hunt elephants with this pocket knife, right? Or perform open heart surgery with this pocket knife. Could they do those things with a pocket knife? Yes. They would do them very, very poorly, right? So don't try to tell them this and then they go try to do them and then it fails. And then you're like, oh, well, I thought it was possible, or blame shift it. Oh, well, product told me it was, we could take down some elephants, right? And no, very much understand who your people are, and I see a ton of customers that have buyer's remorse for that exact example because they had some smaller vendor punching way above their weight, told them this thing would do everything, and it did of the 5 things, it did one of them well, and the other ones were just not necessarily vaporware, but did them very poorly. And they were like, oh, what a great deal. I'm getting all this stuff. And then we're just telling the whole time, we're like, look, there's a reason it's 10 times cheaper, right? You're not really understanding all the nuances of it. Oh, it'll be fine. And then it's not fine. And everybody's pissed off and it doesn't work and there's no support and it doesn't integrate to these things it said it would integrate to. And then you have this horrible experience. And again, everybody could have seen that coming, right? You aren't looking at the details. And that's also, again, is that person, like you said, is their name going to mean anything at that firm going forward? No. They basically have permanently burned that bridge.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, as we kind of bring it home, I think there's been a theme that I'd like to just touch on one last time. Authenticity is something that is, I think, the most important component of being in sales. And that will drive credibility over a long period of time. Most people are not successful in sales. Let's just be honest. I think they dangle this carrot for a lot of people and say, hey, you can do this and you can make this kind of money. And, I think they've improved in what they'll pay you a lot of times, depending on the sale, the type of sale and the margins, on what that salary would look like, the total package, but they will burn you in a year if you haven't sold anything. Mm-hmm. And so you have to understand if you're thinking about going into sales, how hard this job really is, and you have to continue to invest in yourself and being a quality person, learning the science and the art of sales. It's really a people business, right? It's relationships. And so that credibility, whether good or bad, over time will continue to build on itself. Because if you're leaving a wake of disaster behind yourself as a sales consultant, whether it's your fault or you're allowing your employer not to deliver on the promises that you make and then sticking it out, I would argue it'd be better to go find a place where they care about things and where profit isn't necessarily the driving factor. Mm-hmm. I'm lucky enough to work for an organization where growth and culture are the most important things within the organization. I understand you have to keep the doors open, the lights on. These are all things that are important. Certainly, as a sales consultant, you want a company that is financially sound. But I would say that they need to support your customers, short-term, long-term, because if that's not happening, you're not going to have the credibility. And then to continue to invest in yourself and never deviate from an authentic, honest approach, because you can be honest with people and they may buy from the competitor, but they'll remember you were honest with them. And a lot of times they'll come back, right? And so don't try to sell now if, for whatever reason, it can't happen. Don't try to push it. Don't minimize the value that you have a lot of times. And I was talking about discounting before. The nice thing about software a lot of times is there's tons of margin there. And, software companies know that. And the EBITDA is very high. The multiples are very high if they sell. So make sure that you're getting the training that you need, the development you need, even if it's not coming from your leadership. I'm telling you, there's so many great people out there. And I know you had an opinion about that. So what do you think is your last piece of advice for anybody in software sales or professional sales heading into 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, kind of two things. Just one is learn from your top performers, right? I mean, I'm always amazed when I work with a ton of salespeople, and we have one or two that are just so much above the rest. I mean, they're 10 times the next, and they've never even talked to them, right? Like, to me, it's like these people they almost treat them like they're a competitor. It's like, especially if you're assigned a territory and they're in New Mexico and you're in Texas, figure it out. Right. Like, talk to them and say, what are you doing? Like, are you mostly emailing? Are you medium in person? Like, how are you forming these relationships and being successful? And a lot of times they're very open. They're very open people. Yes, here's my approach. Here's how I do business. Here's how I, have been successful. But they're just like, they just see them as some other entity that they've got to beat on their own. They never try to learn from what they've done, right? I mean, that to me is a huge mistake. And another thing is, I would say, this is advice to an organization. This is advice to sales leadership. This is advice to salespeople in general. I have always considered it a huge mistake to have anyone involved in the sales process that has no skin in the game. Now, unfortunately, that's very true a lot of the times. But if you have 99% of the people want this deal to come through because they're going to get a really fat commission, they're very incentive driven. But 1% of them that work in, let's say El Salvador, where whatever this thing is you need, could care less if you close GM or whoever, right? They don't care. Like, if you lose them because of what they did and nothing happens to them, there's no consequence. That is a red flag that will burn you. And trust me, there's tons of times where you think this obscure person somewhere isn't going to affect your deal, and then he does until it happens, right? And I've seen it so many times. And then we scream to the heavens, somebody, even to the CEO, somebody do something about this random person that is screwing up my deal because they won't sign off on something, or they won't approve something, or they're saying that this thing that they said would work isn't going to work, right? Like, something, like, to me, either don't have anyone involved in the sale that influences it, direct influence, don't even have them involved. Or if you're going to have them involved, you better make it very clear to their leadership that if we lose GM because this guy took 3 months to answer my email, he is on the hot seat, right? I mean, I would say fired. But it amazes me how they'll yell at salespeople all day long, and the salesperson will be like, he never responded. I can't do it without the El Salvador guy signing off on this. And then they never talk to the El Salvador guy. They never talk to the management over there. It's always your fault. Well, you should have emailed them 4 times. You should have flown to El Salvador and made it work. You're like, what is happening? Like, it's not my fault. This guy does not want to do his job or doesn't care. He doesn't care, right? Like, that to me is insanity, but it is so common and pervasive. So I think that's where you need to identify those gaps, and you need to find a way to resolution, whatever that means. And you need to expose that to leadership, right? Like, even if you have to go above your own sales manager, be like, look, I've had 2 deals fail because the El Salvador guy won't answer his phone and he ain't in sales. And then they're like, what? They start paying attention, right? And then they get the El Salvador guy to freaking wake up, right? I remember very specifically, I had an opportunity, huge RFP, and nobody was wanting to help me with it, especially outside of sales. Nobody wanted to answer the questions. Nobody wanted to do anything. And I did as much as I could for about a month. But I eventually went straight to the CEO, and I said, look, if we don't answer this last, let's say of the 1,000 questions, these last 100 questions, I go, we're done. We can't even submit it. Like, there's no opportunity. Like, it dies on the table this week. And so the CEO on a Monday afternoon said, I want to call Tuesday morning. Every one of you that's on this thing needs to be on that call and explain why you haven't done your work. Those are his 2 things. You're going to be on that call or looking for a job, and you explain why you haven't answered Steve's questions in a month. And I kid you not, between that email and 10 a.m., all those questions got answered. Every single last one of them. And that goes to show you, like, could those people have answered those questions over the past month? Yes. Did they care? No. Were they tied to sales? No. All of a sudden, their job's on the line. They really started caring. And it's sad that it had to come to that he had to make that threat. But that's where, again, I think that's my big advice, is understanding who these people are, how they work, and if they tell you, look, I'm very busy, it's going to take me 3 weeks to answer anything you have. Well, then you know. But you can also say, hey, look, you set this SLA for me. Right? You told me you're a 3-week turnaround guy, and it's been 3 weeks. Where the heck is my stuff? All right. And I'm going to your boss. I know who he is. I know where the buttons are. I'm going to push all of them until you give me what I need. Right. And I think that's another, big thing advice I would give to salespeople. So.
And that's exactly why I wouldn't give Steve a big red button in front of him, because he would push the buttons. He would push the button. He'd hit the button. Hey, we're blowing this place up.
Well, I'm not going down for El Salvador, guy. I ain't doing it. Nothing against El Salvador, right? He's just my example. All right? I love it. Beautiful country.
Yeah. Oh man, that's great. Well, I want to thank you for sharing some of your advice. Always bringing the funny in the stories, Steve. And to my listeners here at What the Tech, we appreciate you. We hope that you're out there, you're selling a ton. If we can ever be of any service, or you have thoughts or ideas about things that we either missed or should have talked about in this conversation, put them in the comments below. But either way, stay engaged, sell a lot in 2024, and keep listening to What the Tech. Thank you so much. See you next week.